I never planned on telling this story. For 33 years, I convinced myself that silence was safer than truth, that burying memory was the same as surviving it. NASA helped with that. They gave me a pension I didn't ask for, a diagnosis I didn't believe, and a stack of non-disclosure agreements thick enough to pass for insulation. They told me the mission failed. They told the world it never really existed. But I'm running out of time now, and Saturn is no longer quiet. In 1992, I was a propulsion systems engineer assigned to what I was told was a deep space hardware validation program. No press, no patches, no public mission name. The paperwork called it Black Ring, but we never used that aloud. We weren't supposed to talk about it at all. Officially, the launch manifest listed a classified Department of Defense payload. That wasn't unusual back then. The Cold War was over, but the paranoia hadn't caught up yet. You could hide anything in orbit if you stamped the right letterhead on it. What the manifest didn't list were the 6 of us. We weren't astronauts, not in the heroic sense. No public bios, no interviews. We were engineers, systems specialists, and one medical officer pulled from a Navy submarine program. Men selected not for charisma, but for how little we talked, for how well we followed instructions. I was 31 years old and proud just to be there. The launch took place at night, under weather conditions that would have scrubbed any normal mission. I remember standing on the gantry before boarding, staring at the black sky over Cape Canaveral, feeling like the stars were closer than they should have been. That was probably nerves. Or maybe it wasn't. We lifted off without ceremony. No countdown broadcast, no cheering crowd. Just vibration, fire, and the sense that something irreversible had begun. Once we cleared Earth orbit, the truth started to come out in pieces. The craft wasn't just a transport, it was a hybrid, part probe, part crewed platform, built around experimental cryogenic stasis modules. The idea was to leapfrog time. We'd sleep through most of the journey, wake only for critical course corrections, and arrive at Saturn decades before any conventional mission could. They told us it was about propulsion testing. That was the first lie. The second lie came when we were 6 months out, drifting in silence between Mars and the asteroid belt. Command uploaded a sealed data packet that required all 6 of our biometric confirmations to open. I remember my thumb trembling on the scanner. Not fear, exactly. Anticipation. Inside was a set of images. Grainy at first, infrared composites, radar returns, gravity anomaly maps. They showed Saturn's moon Iapetus, specifically its equatorial ridge, the strange wall-like formation that scientists publicly dismissed as a natural oddity. Except these images didn't show a ridge. They showed edges, straight ones, right angles. Don't occur in nature at that scale. Not cleanly, not repeatedly. The more the resolution improved, the harder it became to pretend we were looking at geology. Someone finally asked the question none of us wanted to say out loud. Is this artificial? No one from command answered directly. They never did. Instead, they uploaded older files, declassified fragments from the 1960s, early Voyager drafts that had never been released, handwritten notes scanned from astronomers who'd quietly lost their careers after asking the wrong questions. The anomalies had been there for a long time. Saturn wasn't just a gas giant, it was a marker. By the time we entered Saturn's sphere of influence, the mood on board had changed. The jokes stopped, sleep became shallow. Our medical officer started logging elevated cortisol levels across the crew, even during stasis cycles. I remember waking up early once, heart pounding, convinced I'd heard something moving outside the hull. That didn't make sense. There was nothing out there. Then we began receiving the signal. It wasn't radio. It wasn't electromagnetic. It didn't behave like anything we'd catalogued before. It appeared only when we passed through certain vectors relative to the rings, as if Saturn itself were shaping the transmission. The onboard computers flagged it as background noise at first, but noise doesn't repeat with intent. Noise doesn't change when you listen to it. The signal wasn't a message, it was a response. When we finally maneuvered into orbit around Iapetus, the structures revealed themselves fully. What we'd thought were ridges resolved into massive buried forms extending kilometers beneath the surface, layered, symmetrical, old beyond comprehension. We didn't land immediately. Command ordered weeks of scans, measurements, and silent observation, as if they were afraid that touching the ruins would somehow alert something. They were right to be afraid, because the closer we got, the more I felt it. An uncomfortable pressure behind my eyes, like a memory trying to surface that didn't belong to me. I started dreaming of places I'd never been. Black skies, broken cities, a version of Earth that felt familiar and wrong at the same time. I wasn't the only one. No one said it out loud, but we all knew. Those ruins weren't abandoned. They were waiting. We called it a ruin because we didn't have a better word. A ruin implies collapse, abandonment, the slow surrender of a civilization to weather and time. But nothing we mapped on Iapetus looked surrendered. It looked sealed. Every scan came back layered like armor. Every symmetry felt deliberate. Even the damage, if it was damage, resembled controlled breaks, like ventilation shafts in a bunker. The landing module detached on a schedule that didn't match our own judgment. Command insisted we go down at a specific local morning, a band of weak sunlight crawling over Iapetus's surface. They wanted shadows. They wanted the contrast. I remember suiting up in the airlock and staring at my gloves, watching my fingers flex like they didn't belong to me. The suit smelled of plastic and disinfectant, but beneath that was something else. Metallic, like old coins. I told myself it was my imagination. We were all quieter than usual. Commander Rivas moved with that practiced calm you get from men who've spent their lives in places where mistakes kill. He was Air Force, not NASA, which should have told us everything about what we'd actually signed up for. Morris, our systems tech, kept checking the same panel on his suit over and over. Unclasp, clasp, tap twice, glance at the readout. A ritual. Dr. Havel, our medical officer, was pale. Not ill, just drained. He'd started taking notes in a paper journal because he claimed the onboard logs were smoothing his entries. When I asked what he meant, he just shook his head. "You ever write something down?" he said, "and look back later and it's different. Same meaning, but the words changed." "That's stress," I told him. He met my eyes through the visor. "That's what I keep telling myself." The descent was clean. No atmosphere to fight, just controlled fall and thrusters. Iapetus grew from a mottled marble into a landscape of brutal contrast. One hemisphere bright as bone, the other dark as soot. The equatorial ridge rose ahead like a scar across the moon's throat. Except it wasn't a ridge. Up close, it looked like a wall. Not a single wall, either. Multiple segments, buried and exposed in repeating intervals. The edges weren't jagged. They were planed. Some portions were matte black, absorbing light in a way that made my eyes slide off it. Other sections reflected the sun in thin, sharp lines like blades. The module touched down on a flattened shelf of regolith that hadn't been there in the public Iapetus images. That was when I realized our maps weren't just better resolution. They were different. As the dust settled, the pressure behind my eyes intensified. A pulse that synced to nothing obvious. No heartbeat, no engine rhythm. Just a slow, patient throb that seemed to come from the ground. Rivas's voice filled the comm. "Check in." We did, one by one, all green, all normal. Then the external mics picked up a sound. Not a bang or a scrape, something subtler. A low vibration that the software translated into an audio range for us. It wasn't rhythmic enough to be mechanical. It wasn't random enough to be geological. It sounded like breath. I heard Morris swallow. It came through his mic as a wet click. Rivas pretended not to notice. "Egress," he said. The hatch opened with a hydraulic sigh, and we stepped out into a place no human being was ever supposed to stand. The sky above was a hard black, Saturn hanging in it like an eye. The rings cut across the void in a pale band, impossibly thin and impossibly wide. I'd seen pictures. Pictures didn't do it. Saturn didn't look real. It looked like a painting hung in front of space, a god's ornament. We moved in a tight line toward the nearest exposed segment of the structure. Our boots left shallow impressions in the dust that seemed to cling to the suit fabric as if magnetized. I kept brushing it off, and it kept coming back. At 50 meters, our suit compasses started spinning. At 40 meters, the comms hissed, and the audio filters kicked in. At 30 meters, I stopped breathing. Not because I couldn't, my suit kept oxygen steady, but because a part of me didn't want to. Like the air itself was giving me away. The exposed wall rose maybe 15 meters high. It looked grown rather than built, smooth surfaces intersecting at angles that felt wrong to the eye. Not curved, not jagged. More like geometry refusing to obey the rules our brains expected. Up close, the black material had texture, but it wasn't pitted or cracked. It was patterned in subtle ridges, like fingerprints magnified 1,000 times. I reached out without meaning to. Rivas grabbed my wrist. "Don't," he said. His voice was steady, but the way his glove tightened around mine betrayed him. He was afraid of contact. "Why not?" I asked. "Because command said don't." That wasn't an answer. It was an admission. Morris raised a handheld scanner and swept it over the surface. The device chirped, then froze. Its screen went blank, then filled with static, then returned showing numbers that didn't correspond to any scale we'd programmed. He tried to reboot it. The reboot menu came up in a language none of us recognized. Not symbols, letters, like a human alphabet that had been redesigned by something that hated curves. "Tell me you're seeing this," Morris whispered. "I'm seeing it," I said. Dr. Havel moved closer, his posture tense. "Any radiation?" Rivas checked his readouts. "Nothing above baseline." Havel's voice went thin. "Then why do my teeth feel like they're vibrating?" That was when the seam appeared. I hadn't noticed it at first because it was too perfect, too subtle. A thin line in the black surface, running horizontally at chest height, like the join of a door buried in an alien wall on a moon that wasn't supposed to have doors. Rivas stared at it for a long time. I watched the reflection of Saturn's rings crawl across his visor. "We're not equipped for breach," he said, and for a moment, I thought that would be it. We'd return to the module, report back, and spend weeks arguing. Then his suit radio clicked, and a voice we hadn't heard since Earth spoke in our ears. "Commander Rivas, this is Control. Proceed with entry." Rivas didn't respond right away. It wasn't protocol. He should have acknowledged instantly. Instead, he stood there, silent, staring at the seam as if the wall might open on its own. "Control," he said finally. "We do not have breach tools rated for unknown composition." A pause. Then, "Use the interface." I felt my stomach drop. "The interface?" Rivas repeated. "Left of the seam, approximately 1 meter. You will see a depression. Place your hand there. Do not remove it until instructed." Morris turned his helmet toward me as if to ask whether we were hearing the same thing. We were. We hadn't seen a depression, but once Control said it, our lights caught it, barely visible, like a shallow imprint in the wall. The shape was almost familiar. 5 grooves, a palm-sized hollow, a place for a human hand. Rivas took one slow step forward. He hesitated, as if expecting the wall to punish him for believing in it. Then he raised his gloved hand and pressed it into the depression. Nothing happened. For 3 seconds, it was just a man touching an impossible artifact. then the wall responded, not with motion at first, but with sensation. The vibration in the mics deepened. The pressure behind my eyes became a sharp spike, and I tasted copper even though my helmet was sealed. Rivas jerked slightly, like a current had run through him. "Commander?" Havel asked. Rivas didn't answer. His head tilted, as if he was listening to something under the comms. Then the seam lit up, a faint line of pale light, not bright but present, like moonlight trapped under glass. The seam widened with a slow, patient certainty, and the wall separated soundlessly. No grinding, no air displacement, no mechanical protest. A door opening like it had never been closed. Beyond it was darkness. Not empty darkness, depthless. Our suit lights angled in, and the beams seemed to shorten, swallowed after only a few meters. The space beyond absorbed illumination like the black wall had. Rivas's voice came back, strained. "Control," he said. "What is this place?" Control replied, with a calm that made my blood run cold. "Proceed inside. Confirm structure integrity. Begin documentation." I stared at the open doorway, and I realized, with a clarity that felt like a knife, that Control already knew what we were going to find. They weren't sending us to discover. They were sending us to verify. Crossing the threshold felt like stepping out of time. There was no rush of air, no pressure change. The inside of the structure didn't acknowledge our entry the way a normal space would. It simply accepted us. The darkness receded just enough for our suit lights to exist, as if the place tolerated illumination but refused to reflect it. The doorway sealed behind us without a sound. Not slammed, not locked. It closed, the seam dissolving into smooth black like it had never been there at all. Morris spun around immediately, his light sweeping the wall where the door had been. "Tell me you saw that." "I saw it," I said. "Control," Rivas said, his voice clipped. "The entry point has sealed. Confirm?" There was no answer. We waited. 10 seconds. 20. Only the low vibration remained, stronger now, humming through the soles of my boots and into my bones. It wasn't sound anymore. It was proximity. "Control," Rivas repeated. "Respond." Static answered him. Not white noise, something patterned, almost layered. Dr. Havel exhaled slowly. "We should document and retreat." "Retreat where?" Morris snapped. The interior corridor stretched ahead of us, wide enough for 3 people abreast, tall enough that our lights couldn't find the ceiling. The walls weren't walls in the traditional sense. They were continuous surfaces, smooth but subtly striated, like muscle fiber frozen in place. The floor wasn't flat. It adjusted under our weight, compressing just enough to suggest it wasn't solid stone or metal. It reminded me of walking on packed earth after rain, firm but alive. That thought made my stomach tighten. "Let's keep moving," Rivas said. "Authority by necessity." "We go 50 meters in, document everything, then reassess." I nodded and forced my legs to obey. Every step deeper brought a growing sense of familiarity. That was the worst part. My brain kept trying to label things, to connect shapes and spaces to memories that didn't belong to me. I knew this corridor, not consciously, not logically, but some buried instinct recognized the proportions, the spacing, the way the space curved gently, guiding movement without forcing it, like a place designed for bodies similar to ours. We passed openings along the corridor, arched recesses that led into side chambers. Our lights skimmed over them, revealing shapes inside that made my breath catch. Not furniture, not machines, structures, frameworks that rose from the floor and ceiling like skeletal remains of something once functional. Some were tall and narrow, others wide and branching. All of them shared the same impossible geometry, angles that met cleanly without obeying Euclidean sense. Havel slowed near one of the chambers, his light fixed on something embedded in the far wall. "Those markings," he said. "Do you see them?" I did. lines etched into the surface, shallow but precise. They weren't decorative, they weren't random. They followed patterns, repetitions, intervals, breaks that triggered the same part of my brain that recognized language. Not words, syntax. I felt a sudden sharp headache bloom behind my eyes. I raised a hand to my helmet reflexively, even though it wouldn't help. Morris cursed softly. My HUD's glitching. What kind of glitch? Rivas asked. It's auto-labeling things. I frowned. Auto-labeling what? Everything, Morris said. The walls, the structures. It's pulling tags from nowhere, not from our database. He turned his wrist toward me, sharing his display. For a moment, I thought it was just corrupted text. Then I realized I could read it. Not clearly, not consciously, but the meaning slid into place anyway. Load-bearing structure, transit corridor, interface node. My heart began to race. Havel, I said, tell me you're seeing this too. I'm seeing something. Worse, he replied. His voice trembled despite his effort to steady it. My biosensors are picking up memory activity, elevated hippocampal response, like I'm recalling something. Recalling what? Rivas asked. Havel shook his head. I don't know, but it doesn't feel like imagination. The vibration deepened again, and the corridor ahead opened into a vast chamber. Our lights spilled into it, swallowed by scale. The floor dropped away into a broad, shallow basin. Structures rose from it in concentric patterns, each ring larger than the last, like a frozen ripple. At the center stood something unmistakably deliberate. A pillar. It rose at least 30 meters, tapering slightly as it climbed. Its surface carved with the same etched lines we'd seen earlier. But these were deeper, more pronounced. They pulsed faintly, reacting to our presence like bioluminescent veins. I stopped without realizing it. The pressure behind my eyes spiked again, and suddenly, I wasn't on Iapetus anymore. I was standing on a plain under a yellow sky. Cities stretched to the horizon, built from the same dark material, their towers arranged with the same patient geometry. I could feel heat on my face, wind against skin that wasn't covered by a suit. I heard voices, not words, intent. The vision collapsed as abruptly as it came. I staggered, catching myself before I fell. Jesus, Morris breathed. You saw it too, didn't you? I looked at him. His face behind the visor was pale, eyes wide. You saw something, I said. He nodded. A city. Rivas turned slowly, scanning all of us. Everyone report. Now. Havel spoke first. I experienced a vivid hallucination, multisensory, consistent across memory centers. Morris swallowed. Same. Rivas hesitated, then said quietly, Me too. They all looked at me. A world, I said. Not alien, just older. The silence that followed was heavier than any vacuum. That was when the pillar responded. The etched lines brightened, their glow intensifying until they cast faint reflections on our suits. The vibration resolved into something almost rhythmic, a pattern. The air, or whatever passed for it, seemed to thicken. Control, Rivas said urgently. We're experiencing neurological effects, visual hallucinations, memory intrusion. Request immediate extraction. This time, Control answered. But it wasn't the voice we recognized. It sounded like Control, same cadence, same filtered neutrality, but something was wrong with the timing. The pauses between words were just a fraction too long, as if the speaker were choosing them carefully. Negative, Commander, the voice said. You are not experiencing hallucinations. Rivas's jaw clenched. Then explain what we're seeing. A pause. Then, you are experiencing recall. My skin prickled. Recall of what? Havel asked. Of a shared origin, Control replied. Proceed to the central interface. The pillar? Morris asked. Yes. Rivas hesitated. I could see the conflict tearing through him. Training screamed caution. Authority demanded compliance. And beneath it all, curiosity burned like a second heart. "Control," he said slowly. "Confirm. Is this structure alien?" Another pause. "No," Control said. "It is ancestral." The word hit me like a blow. "Ancestral?" I repeated. "That's not possible." "Your definition of humanity is incomplete," Control replied. "It has always been." The pillar's glow intensified again, and this time the etched lines shifted, reconfiguring themselves. The patterns resolved into something unmistakable. Figures, tall, upright silhouettes etched into the surface. 2 arms, 2 legs, a head, human, or close enough to make the difference unbearable. "Proceed," Control said. "The interface requires direct contact." Rivas looked at us one by one. "We vote," he said, "right now." "No," Control interrupted. "There is no vote." The vibrations surged, and for a moment I felt something else. Recognition. Not mine. Something older, stirring in response to our presence. Waiting. Rivas exhaled slowly and stepped toward the pillar. "If this goes wrong," he said quietly, "get back to the module. If you can." He raised his gloved hand and placed it against the glowing surface. The light flared, and the chamber woke up. The flare didn't blind me. It did something worse. It reframed everything my eyes were seeing, like reality had been running in a safe mode and someone had just toggled full access. The pillar's glow spilled across the chamber in thin sheets, and the structures around us stopped looking like dead architecture and started looking like a system. Not a ruin, a facility. The vibration sharpened into a clean, layered frequency that my suit tried to interpret as sound. The translation software failed twice, then gave up and fed it to us raw. It wasn't a voice, it wasn't even language. It was instruction encoded as sensation. Rivas stiffened, his hand still pressed to the pillar. His whole suit trembled, not from fear, but from involuntary muscle response, like his nervous system was being plucked. "Commander," Havel said, stepping forward. "Pull away. Now." Rivas didn't. His helmet tilted upward slowly, as if something inside him was guiding his gaze along the etched figures. The light pulsed again, and I watched the carvings on the pillar shift into new configurations, diagrams, alignments, sequences of symbols that felt like mathematics, trying to pretend it was art. Morris's breath rasped in the comm. "My HUD just updated." "What do you mean updated?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. He sounded distracted, like a man reading something he couldn't stop reading. "It's giving me labels again," he said finally. "But now it's adding dates." "Dates of what?" Morris swallowed. "Of us." I turned toward him, stomach tightening. "That's impossible." He raised his wrist, sharing his feed. A translucent overlay floated in his visor, lines of text that shouldn't have existed in any mission software. But I could read them the same way I'd read the earlier tags, as if the meanings were being placed directly into my cognition. Havel, Jacob. Biological series. 7. Rivas, Emilio. Biological series. 7. Bennett, Thomas. That was me. My name, my designation. Biological series. 7. I felt cold spread through my chest, like someone had poured ice water directly into my lungs. "Control," Rivas said suddenly, voice strained and distant. "I can see it." His words didn't sound like him. They sounded older, like he was reciting something he'd practiced long ago. Havel stepped closer, hands raised as if approaching a wounded animal. "Emilio, look at me. Can you hear me?" Rivas's helmet turned toward Havel slowly. "Yes," he said, "but it's louder in here." "What's louder?" Rivas didn't answer. His gloved fingers flexed against the pillar, and the etched lines brightened in response, like the structure was reading him. Then the floor beneath us shifted, not like an earthquake, more like a muscle tightening. The basin around the pillar lit up with faint lines that traced concentric rings outward. The rings weren't random. They connected to the surrounding frameworks, and suddenly the entire chamber looked like a circuit diagram carved into architecture. A system powering up. My suit's radiation alarms flickered once, then went quiet. Thermal sensors spiked, then normalized. The readings didn't make sense, because the environment itself didn't make sense. It was as if the chamber was deciding what rules to follow. Morris cursed. "My comms. I'm getting a second channel, not from control." I listened. At first it was just static. Then words emerged, faint, layered beneath the hiss, not in English, not in any language I knew. But I understood them anyway, not as translation, as memory. "Welcome home." I froze. Havel froze. Even Rivas, still touching the pillar, seemed to tense, like a dog hearing its name spoken by someone it can't see. "Who said that?" Morris whispered. No one answered, because none of us wanted to admit the truth. It hadn't come through the comm system. It had come through us. The pillar pulsed again, and images slammed into my mind hard enough to make me gasp. Not hallucinations like before. Those had been fleeting, dreamlike. These were records. I saw Earth, but not our Earth. The continents were familiar, yet rearranged in subtle ways. Shorelines where coastlines shouldn't be. Ice caps that extended like claws. I saw cities made of black geometry rising along fault lines, immense and silent, their streets patterned like circuitry. Then I saw Saturn. Not distant, not a pretty picture in the sky, but close. Looming above a world that was not Iapetus. A world with a thin atmosphere and a red sun. I saw ships, sleek, organic forms, descending towards Saturn's rings. And I saw something else. A presence. Not a creature, not a ship. A shape in space that warped the stars behind it, like a hole punched through reality. The ships moved toward it, with the inevitability of insects toward flame. The vision shifted again, and I was in a chamber like this one, but filled with beings that looked like us and didn't. Taller, leaner, eyes too large, skin too pale. Human, but not. They stood around a pillar, hands pressed to its surface, and their faces weren't afraid. They were resigned. I felt their emotion like it was my own, the certainty that they had failed, and the acceptance that failure had to be sealed away. Then a final image, a door closing, a wall sealing, a system going dormant, waiting. I staggered backward, nearly falling. The floor steadied me, subtly rising under my boots as if it didn't want me to collapse. Havel grabbed my arm. "Tom, look at me. Talk to me." "I saw..." My voice cracked. "I saw history." Havel's eyes were wide. "So did I." Morris was trembling. "This isn't a ruin. It's a memory vault." Rivas spoke without moving, still pressed to the pillar. "It's a lock." The words didn't sound like a guess. They sounded like something being recited. "Emilio," Havel said sharply. "Pull away from it." Rivas's gloved hand lifted an inch. The pillar's glow dimmed immediately, as if losing contact meant losing power. Rivas froze. Then he pressed his hand back down. The glow surged, and his voice dropped into a register that made my skin crawl. "They built this to keep it asleep," he said. Morris stared at him. "Keep what asleep?" Rivas didn't answer with words. He answered by turning his helmet toward the far side of the chamber, toward a section of wall I hadn't paid attention to because it looked like everything else. Black, smooth, inert. Except now it wasn't inert. A thin line of pale light traced itself across it, forming an outline. Another door, bigger, and the floor's concentric rings began to rotate. Not physically, visually, like the patterns were shifting under the surface, aligning. I heard a distant sound, deep, slow, immense, like something massive settling in its sleep. Havel backed away. "No, no, no, we do not open another door." Rivas's voice came through the comm, steady and wrong. Control wants it open. Control isn't control, Morris said, shaking. That voice, it's not them. As if in response, the comm channel cleared and the control voice returned, crisp and neutral. Commander Rivas, proceed to secondary seal. Initiate access. Rivas didn't question it. He started walking toward the new door. Havel stepped in front of him. Emilio, stop. Rivas paused. For a second, I saw the old Rivas, conflicted, human, afraid. Then the glow from the pillar brightened again behind him, and his posture straightened. He looked at Havel like he was looking through him. I remember, Rivas said quietly. Havel swallowed. Remember what? Rivas's helmet tilted slightly, as if listening to a voice inside his skull. Why we were made, he said. Then he pushed past Havel and reached for the second door. My instincts screamed to grab him, but my feet wouldn't move. Because some part of me, the part that had recognized the corridor, the markings, the figures, was already whispering the same awful thought. We hadn't found ancient alien ruins. We'd found a piece of ourselves that had been hidden on purpose. Havel grabbed Rivas's arm. It wasn't a dramatic lunge. He didn't tackle him. He didn't shout. He just reached out with a gloved hand and clamped down, like he was stopping a friend from stepping into traffic. Emilio, he said, low and urgent, listen to me. Whatever's in your head is not command authority. It's contamination. Rivas stopped, but he didn't turn around. His helmet remained aimed at the second door, the pale outline of it shimmering like a scar in the black wall. I'm not contaminated, he said. I'm aligned. Morris let out a thin, panicked laugh. Aligned with what? An alien lockbox? Rivas's shoulders lifted as if he was inhaling something. Not alien. That word again. I felt it in my teeth, the way it repeated through the comms like a mantra trying to overwrite our definitions. Ancestral, aligned, remember. The concentric rings beneath the floor continued their slow rotation. Not a mechanical spin, more like shifting layers under ice, aligning grooves. Each time the pattern settled into a new configuration, the vibration changed pitch, and the pale outline of the door sharpened. It was counting down. Control, I said, forcing my voice to steady. We're aborting. Door sealed behind us. Crew experiencing neurological interference. We are returning to the lander. The response came instantly. Negative, proceed. The voice was smooth, and that was the problem. It didn't sound like a human being making a decision. It sounded like a system executing instructions. Havel's grip tightened on Rivas. We need to break his contact with the pillar, he muttered. Something's anchored in him. Then pull him away, Morris said. His voice cracked. Before he opens that thing. Havel pulled. Rivas resisted, not violently, but with a weight that shouldn't have been possible in low gravity. His boots pressed into the floor, and the floor pressed back, subtly rising under his soles, as if it were bracing him, like the structure itself didn't want to let go. I stepped forward, grabbed Rivas's other arm. Emilio, I said. Commander, look at me. Whatever you're hearing, it's not us. It's not mission protocol. His helmet turned slightly. For a fraction of a second, the visor reflected my own face back at me, distorted, ghostly. Then Rivas spoke, and my blood went cold. Thomas, he said softly. You were here before. My name sounded wrong in his mouth, like he wasn't saying it for the first time. I wanted to deny it, to laugh, to call it stress. But the pressure behind my eyes surged, and a memory I'd never lived flickered across my mind. Hands pressed to a pillar, black walls, Saturn hanging in the sky like a verdict. I forced it down. That's not real, I said through clenched teeth. Rivas's voice lowered. It's more real than Houston. Morris backed away, shaking his head. No, no, this is how it starts. This is how people die. We need to... He didn't finish because the second door lit, Not just the outline this time. The entire seam bloomed with pale light, and the air in the chamber felt like it thickened, like the space itself leaned forward to watch. The vibration resolved into a pulse, slow, heavy, like a heartbeat too large for any body. Havel's breathing went shallow. "Do you hear that?" "Yes," I whispered. It wasn't sound. It was the sense of something shifting behind the wall, something so immense that our brains tried to interpret it as rhythm. Rivas stopped resisting. He relaxed in our grips, and the sudden slack made me stumble a half step forward. Then he spoke again, voice calm. "It's waking," he said. "We have to finish the sequence." Havel's voice rose. "What sequence? Emilio, what are you talking about?" Rivas tilted his helmet toward the pillar behind us, which still glowed faintly, as if it could see him even without contact. "The 7th series," he said. "The last viable iteration." My stomach turned. "Iteration?" Morris let out a choked sound. "Series 7. That's what my HUD showed. Biological series 7. Havel stared at us, then at Rivas. "What the hell does that mean?" Rivas lifted his hand slowly and pointed at the etched figures on the pillar. In the dim glow, I could make out the silhouettes again, upright forms, human-shaped, repeating down the column in subtle variations, some tall, some shorter, some with different proportions, not different species, different versions. "Series," Rivas said, "means attempts." Havel shook his head, voice breaking. "Attempts at what?" Rivas's answer came with a soft certainty that made me want to vomit. "Attempts at making us compatible," he said. The chamber's pulse deepened, and my helmet's internal pressure gauge flickered. For a second, it showed negative. "Your values." Then it corrected itself as if embarrassed. That was when the wall, between the door outlines, began to move. Not open, not split. Move. The surface rippled, like thick liquid responding to a current. The pale seam widened slightly, and a thin line of darkness appeared between the two sides. Darkness deeper than the corridor behind us. Darkness that felt less like absence and more like presence. Morris's comm picked up a faint whisper, almost inaudible. But it wasn't static this time. It was words, layered beneath the vibration. "Return." Havel heard it too. His head snapped toward the door. "Did you—" "Return." My mouth went dry. "It's talking." Rivas spoke softly, almost lovingly. "It's calling us back," he said. Havel stepped between Rivas and the door again, spreading his arms. "No, we are not opening it. Whatever's behind that seal, it was sealed for a reason." Rivas stared at him. "Yes." Havel's eyes narrowed. "Then why? Do you want to open it?" Rivas's answer was immediate. "Because we're the reason," he said. The words landed like an anvil. My hands tightened into fists inside my gloves. "That doesn't mean anything." "It does," Rivas said. "We were built to carry it, to host it, to keep it alive without letting it loose." Morris shook his head violently. No, I'm done. I'm going back to the lander." He turned and ran toward where the first doorway had been. There was no doorway, just smooth black wall. Morris slammed into it, hard enough that his suit alarms chirped. He staggered back, then pressed both hands against the surface, searching for seams, cracks, any sign the exit existed. "Open!" he shouted. "Open, damn it!" The wall didn't respond. Instead, the chamber responded. The floor rings pulsed with light, and Morris froze. He lifted his hands slowly, staring at his gloves as if they'd been stained. "I can't feel my fingers," he whispered. Then his suitcom erupted with feedback, and his voice doubled. One track normal, one track slightly delayed, like an echo from a different room. Morris's head tilted, and when he spoke again, the second voice spoke with him, in perfect unison. "We are not leaving," Morris said. Havel stepped back, horror written in every line of his posture. "Oh my God!" I stared at Morris's visor. Behind it, his eyes looked unfocused, as if something inside him had stepped forward. Rivas's voice softened. "It's synchronizing." Havel's voice trembled. "Synchronizing what?" Rivas didn't answer. He walked toward the second door like a man approaching an altar, and this time neither Havel nor I stopped him. Because the pulse in the chamber had started matching my heartbeat. Because the pressure behind my eyes had become a familiar ache, like a remembered wound. Because somewhere in the dark behind that door, something was breathing. And the worst part was, it didn't feel like a stranger. It felt like the other half of my own mind. Rivas reached the second door and didn't hesitate. He placed his palm against the pale seam like he'd practiced it 1,000 times. The wall responded immediately, light crawling outward in branching lines that reminded me of veins under skin. For one absurd moment, I expected a hiss of decompression, a rush of dust, some physical sign that we were breaking into a sealed space. Instead, the seam opened like an eyelid. No sound, no resistance, just a widening slit of darkness, and the sensation that something on the other side had been waiting with perfect patience. Morris stepped forward beside him, moving with the same calm wrongness, his posture too loose, his head slightly tilted as if he were listening to instructions the rest of us couldn't hear. Havel grabbed my forearm hard enough to hurt through the suit padding. "Tom," he whispered, "we're losing them." "I know," I said, though my voice didn't feel like mine. The pulse in the chamber deepened. It matched my heart exactly now, and that terrified me more than anything else. It meant the system wasn't just influencing our perceptions, it was tuning us. The door widened further, and our suit lights finally pushed into the space beyond. They shouldn't have. Light should have reflected off something, even bare rock. But the beam traveled into that darkness and stopped, as if it hit an invisible wall, leaving a hard edge of illumination floating in empty black. That black wasn't empty. It had texture, the faint suggestion of depth and motion, like smoke in still air. Rivas stepped through first. His boots crossed the threshold and disappeared into the dark up to the ankles. There was no floor visible, but he didn't fall. It was as if the darkness itself supported him. Morris followed, unblinking. Havel swore under his breath. "We stay here. We do not go in. We—" The chamber's vibrations spiked, and Havel's voice cut off mid-sentence. He froze, his head snapping slightly to one side like he'd heard a sudden sound. I watched his gloved hand rise slowly toward his helmet, as if he were trying to touch his temple through the visor. "Havel," I said. He didn't answer. His breathing turned shallow. "Quick." Then he whispered, barely audible, "Tom, I'm remembering my wife." I stared at him. "Your wife?" He swallowed. "I don't have a wife." A chill washed through me, so cold it felt like my blood had been replaced. Havel wasn't married. He'd mentioned it on the way out, joking about how the Navy owned his time, and solitude was the only perk. But the way he said it now, his voice full of grief, made it sound like he'd lost someone. "Jacob," I said, trying to anchor him. "Look at me. You're on Iapetus. You're in a suit. This is interference." Havel's eyes, visible through the visor, glistened like he was fighting tears. "She's on the other side," he whispered. "She's calling me." My throat tightened, because I heard it too. Not her voice, not a woman's voice specifically, but the sense of someone I knew, someone I missed, someone my mind insisted existed just outside the reach of memory. The darkness beyond the doorway pulsed faintly like a throat swallowing. And then it spoke. Not with sound, with certainty injected straight into thought. "Come closer." I staggered. My boots shifted on the floor, and the floor shifted back, guiding me, subtle as a hand at the small of my back. Havel's grip tightened on my arm again. "Tom, don't." I didn't mean to move. I didn't decide. My body took a step anyway, then another. Havel tried to pull me back, but his strength wasn't enough against whatever the chamber was doing. against whatever my own nervous system was becoming. We reached the threshold. The darkness there had a faint sheen, like oil on water, and my suit lights reflected off it in warped, impossible curves. The edge of the doorway felt colder than vacuum, colder than space should allow. It was a cold that didn't come from temperature. It came from absence. Revis's voice came out of the dark, muffled, as if he were speaking from underwater. "Thomas," he said. "It's beautiful," Morris added in that doubled unison that wasn't his anymore. "We're home." Havel made a choked sound, like laughter trapped in the wrong place. "Home," he whispered. "That's what it keeps saying." I tried to back away. My legs didn't respond. The darkness pushed against my visor, not physically, but in pressure waves that made the glass vibrate. My HUD flickered again, and new text scrolled across the bottom of my display. Uninvited. Series 7. Integration viable. Carrier readiness. 62%. Proceed. My stomach lurched. "Control," I forced out. "What is this? What are you doing to us?" The response came, and this time it wasn't layered. It was clean, like a voice that had decided to stop pretending. "You are being restored," it said. "The 7th series is late." I clenched my jaw. Restored to what? A pause that felt like something smiling. "To function," Control replied. Havel's voice rose, frantic. "Function as what? Explain." "Carrier organisms," Control said. "Cognitive vessels, the only viable biological substrate for containment." I felt my knees weaken. Containment. Not prison, not vault. Containment of something living. I tried to look away from the doorway, but my eyes kept snapping back. The darkness had begun to form a shape within it, faint outlines emerging like a figure stepping behind frosted glass. Tall, humanoid, too thin. Its face wasn't visible, but I sensed where it would have been. I sensed its attention, fixed on me like a hand closing around a throat. Havel whimpered. He actually whimpered, the sound of a grown man reduced to something small. That's not my wife," he whispered. "No, it wasn't." The entity in the dark pressed closer to the threshold, and with it came a flood of images, so fast and sharp they felt like knives. Earth under a dying sun, cities collapsing into geometric sinkholes, people, humans, running, screaming, their faces contorting not just in fear but in recognition, because they'd seen it before, they'd known it, they'd built Saturn's lock to hold it back, and they'd failed. The images shifted again to a room like this, filled with dozens of figures, human and not quite, hands pressed to pillars, their eyes vacant as something moved behind them, as if their minds were doors being held open. I gasped, and the darkness surged forward a fraction. Then I felt it, a touch, not on my suit, not on my skin, inside my head, like a finger pressing into the soft part of my thoughts. My vision blurred, and suddenly I wasn't seeing the chamber. I was seeing a lab, a cold white room. Men, in uniforms. A NASA logo on a binder, but stamped over with black ink and a symbol I didn't recognize. I was strapped into a chair, younger, my hair darker, my face less worn. A voice asked me questions. "How much do you remember now, Thomas?" I tried to answer, but my mouth wouldn't work. They injected something into my arm. "You're the 7th iteration," the voice said calmly. "The last attempt. If you don't integrate, we don't get another chance." I snapped back into the chamber, choking on my own breath. Havel was staring at me like he could see the change in my eyes. "Tom," he said, voice shaking, "what did they do to you before this mission?" I couldn't speak, because I knew. I'd always known, buried under the official story, buried under drugs and paperwork and denial. Black Ring wasn't a mission to discover. It was a mission to deliver. We weren't explorers. We were containers being brought back to a seal that had weakened. Rivas's voice came again from the dark, softer now. "It wants to move," he said. "It's been asleep too long." The humanoid outline in the doorway leaned forward, and the cold behind my eyes became a familiar ache, like a wound reopening. Havel grabbed my helmet with both hands, forcing me to face him. "Tom," he said, desperate, "tell me you can fight it." I wanted to say yes. I wanted to promise him I was still myself. But in the darkness beyond the door, the thing that had been sealed on Iapetus shifted, and the pressure in my skull eased in a way that felt like relief, like surrender. And that was when I realized the true horror. It wasn't forcing its way into us. It was offering to complete something we'd been missing our whole lives. And some part of me wanted it. Havel wouldn't let go of my helmet. His gloved hands gripped the sides like he could physically hold my thoughts in place. His visor was inches from mine, reflecting my own wide eyes back at me, turning me into a stranger. "Tom," he said again, slower this time, as if speaking softly might keep me from breaking. "Tell me you can fight it." Behind him, the chamber glowed in patient pulses. The pillar watched. The floor rings continued their slow, purposeful alignment. The doorway to the dark stayed open like a wound that refused to close. And inside that dark, something leaned closer. I could feel it studying me, not with curiosity, but with a kind of hungry assessment, like a tool being weighed in a hand. I forced air into my lungs. "Jacob, we need to get out." His shoulders sagged with relief for half a second, like my words had thrown him a rope. Then the rope burned, because the moment I set out, the pressure behind my eyes tightened again, and another memory slid into place. Smooth, inevitable. A corridor, a white corridor, not black. Clean walls, bright lights. A man in a lab coat holding a clipboard. "You can't get out," the man said, without malice. "There's nothing for you out there." "Not really." I blinked hard, and the memory dissolved, but the emotional residue stayed, an impression of inevitability. Havel must have seen something shift in my face, because his grip tightened again. "You're slipping," he whispered. "No," I lied. He shook his head. "You don't understand. I've seen this in submarine crews. Isolation psychosis, group delusion. But this isn't that. This is synchronization, like it's tuning us to a frequency." Morris's voice came from somewhere behind Havel, calm and doubled. "It's not tuning," he said. "It's correcting." Havel turned sharply. Morris stood near the sealed wall where the first door had been, posture relaxed, hands lowered, like he was waiting for instructions. The wrongness in him wasn't just in his voice. It was in his stillness, the absence of panic, the absence of urgency. The human part of him had stepped aside. Rivas's voice came from inside the dark doorway. "You're afraid because you're incomplete," he said, and the echo of the chamber made it sound like he was speaking from beneath the floor. Havel backed away from me, hands still raised as if warding off a threat. "Emilio," he called toward the darkness, "come back. You're not thinking clearly." Rivas laughed softly. It wasn't mocking. It was pitying. "I'm thinking for the first time in my life," he said. "All of it makes sense now." The humanoid outline in the doorway sharpened slightly, like the darkness had decided to show us just enough. The figure wasn't fully visible, more like a negative space shaped like a body, an absence given outline by the light failing around it. And then it reached out. A long, thin arm, too thin, extended toward the chamber. It didn't cross the threshold fully, as if held back by an invisible barrier. Its hand hovered in the air, fingers elongated and jointed wrong, like the idea of a hand drawn by something that had only studied anatomy from memory. The cold radiating from it wasn't temperature. It was emotional. It felt like standing near a grave that contained someone you loved. Havel whispered, That's it. His voice was small. That's what they sealed. The control voice returned, clearer than ever. Dr. Havel, it said, you are interfering with integration. Havel snapped his head up. Shut up, he hissed. You're not control. A pause, then the voice changed. The cadence smoothed. The tone deepened. The neutrality peeled away. You may call me what you called me before, it said. Havel's breathing hitched. Before when? You remember, the voice replied. The chamber pulsed. And Havel's posture collapsed slightly, as if someone had cut a string inside him. His hands trembled. His helmet tilted downward. Jacob, I said, terrified. Don't listen, he whispered. I do remember. My stomach twisted. Havel's suit feed flashed on my peripheral display, his vitals spiking, brain activity surging in patterns my HUD labeled without permission. Recall cascade. He took a step toward the doorway. I grabbed his arm, yanking him back. Jacob, I barked. That's not your memory. It's feeding you something. Havel looked at me through his visor, eyes wet. It's feeding me everything, he said. I can see my life, Tom. Not just this one. I can see the others. The others? My throat went dry. He nodded, shaking. Different names, different faces. Same me, same you. I felt my own head begin to throb harder, like my brain was trying to reject the idea and failing. Morris spoke again, calm as a sleepwalker. Series 6 refused, he said. Series 6 broke. Series 6 tried to run back to the lander and died screaming against a wall that wasn't a door. My blood went cold. You weren't here before, I said to him. You're Morris. This is your first mission. Morris's visor angled toward me. No. Then his doubled voice spoke with perfect certainty. I have died here, he said. I have died here 6 times. Havel made a broken sound. I wanted to hit Morris, to shake him, to do something physical that might prove reality still had edges. But my body felt heavy, as if the chamber's gravity had shifted without instruments noticing. The control voice spoke again, and I realized it wasn't coming through the comms at all anymore. It was coming from the structure itself, from the walls, from the floor, from the part of my mind that recognized it. The seal is failing, it said. Time has degraded it. External interference has degraded it. Your species has approached the threshold too many times. Havel's voice shook with anger. So you drag us here, you rewrite our minds, you call it restoration. You were created for this, the voice replied. You volunteered for this. I snarled, I didn't volunteer. A pause. Then the voice said my name like it was a private joke. Thomas Bennett, it said. You begged. My vision blurred. A memory slammed in so hard I staggered. I was in a room with a single window looking out at Earth. Blue and bright. I was older than 31, hair threaded with grey, hands shaking. A man in uniform said, It's going to wake. We can't stop it with machines. We need carriers. I said, Then make me one. He asked, Do you understand what you're asking? And I answered, If I don't, it gets out. I snapped back into the chamber with a gasp, nearly choking. Havel stared at me, horror blooming. Tom, you remembered something. I could barely speak. They made us, I whispered. On purpose. Havel shook his head violently. No, that's insane. Is it? I asked, voice raw. Or is it the only thing that explains why this place recognizes our hands, our names, our series? The humanoid outline in the doorway moved again. It didn't step into the chamber. It couldn't. The seal, whatever remained of it, held. So instead it pressed closer to the invisible barrier, and the darkness around it thickened, forming the suggestion of a face. No eyes, no mouth. But I felt its attention lock on me, and in that attention was a familiar ache. It wanted me, not because it hated me, because I was built to fit. Rivas's voice came from deeper inside the dark. "Stop fighting," he said softly. "You'll feel whole." Havel whispered, "Emilio, please." Rivas didn't answer. Then something shifted in the chamber behind us. A new light line traced itself across the far wall, different from the doors, thinner, angled. A third seam, an emergency exit, a new path. I turned toward it, hope flaring like a match, and the control voice chuckled inside my skull. "There is always an exit," it said. "You have taken it before." The third seam brightened, and I realized with sudden terror that the structure wasn't offering us escape. It was offering us options, different ways to fail. The third seam didn't look like a door, it looked like a scar someone had tried to stitch shut. Thin, angled, almost accidental, like the structure didn't want us to notice it, or like it had been added later by hands that didn't belong here. The pale light tracing it was weaker than the other two, as if whatever powered this place considered it an afterthought, or a last resort. Havel saw it too. His head snapped toward it, and I felt his grip on my arm tighten again. "Is that?" he began. Morris cut him off with that calm, doubled voice. "Don't go to it!" Havel's eyes widened. "Why?" Morris didn't answer immediately. His posture stayed loose, his hands at his sides, like a man waiting for permission to move. Then, the second voice under his spoke, "Because that's where they put the mistakes." My stomach dropped. "The mistakes?" I repeated. The chamber pulsed, the floor rings rotated another fraction, and the third seam brightened, like it had heard us talking about it. The control voice slid into my head, smooth as oil. "That is not an exit," it said. "That is a disposal channel." Havel's voice rose, furious and shaking. "You're lying." A pause. Then, "I am informing." The humanoid outline in the dark doorway leaned closer to the barrier again. The cold that radiated from it wasn't just grief now, it carried hunger. Rivas's voice came from deeper inside the dark, distant, reverent. "It's getting impatient," he said. "The seal can't hold forever." I forced myself to move. Every instinct screamed to stay still, to not draw attention, to not let the structure see me shift. But I couldn't stand there and watch my crew dissolve into some ancestral program. I pulled Havel with me, away from the dark doorway and toward the third seam. Morris's head turned, slow and deliberate, visor locking onto us. "Thomas," he said, and hearing my name from his mouth made my skin crawl. "You can't take that door." "Watch me," I spat. Havel followed, but he was struggling, his movements jerky, like someone tugging him backward by invisible threads. "I keep hearing her," he whispered. "I keep hearing—" "No," I snapped, harsher than I meant. "It's bait. It's all bait." We reached the third seam. Up close, it wasn't carved as cleanly as the other doors. The edges had micro-fractures, like the material had been stressed. The pale light didn't glow smoothly. It flickered, weak and irregular, as if the seam was connected to power it wasn't designed to carry. I raised my hand toward it. Nothing happened. No depression for a palm. No interface node. Just the seam itself, pulsing faintly, like it was waiting for the right trigger. "Control," I said through clenched teeth. "Open it." Silence. Then the voice returned, colder than before. "You do not open that," it said. "You survive integration. Go to hell." "You have," the voice replied. Havel let out a broken laugh, then a sob. "Tom, I can't, my head—" I turned to him and saw his eyes unfocused, like he was staring past my shoulder at something only he could see. "Jacob," I said, gripping his suit. "Stay with me." He swallowed, trembling. "I can see the room where they did it, the first time. I can see the straps." My heart hammered. "You remember being made?" He nodded slowly. "They called it acclimation," he whispered. They told me I was helping humanity. I believed them. The floor pulse synced with his words like the structure approved. I stared at the seam again, and suddenly I understood. This place didn't respond to commands. It responded to state, alignment, recall, integration. The more you remembered, the more it opened. The more it opened, the more you remembered. A loop. I took a slow breath and forced my mind to go cold, to focus on something simple and mechanical. Valves, fuel lines, numbers. I tried to bury every strange memory, every intrusive image, every whispered home. I pictured my old desk at JPL, a coffee mug, a spreadsheet. My heartbeat slowed slightly. The seam dimmed. Damn it, I muttered. Havel looked at me confused. What are you doing? I think it opens when we remember, I said, and it closes when we don't. Havel's voice shook. So what? You want us to forget our way out? Yes, I said, even though saying it felt like cutting off a limb. We need to make ourselves incompatible. Morris's voice drifted closer behind us. You can't. I didn't turn. Back off, Morris. I'm not Morris, the doubled voice said softly. Not anymore. I spun anyway. Morris stood 10 meters away, between us and the pillar, like a guard. The glow from the pillar bathed his suit in pale light. His visor reflected the chamber's concentric rings, and for a moment, I had the absurd impression that the structure was looking through him. Thomas, he said, and the second voice underneath made it sound like a chorus. That seam leads to the discard chambers, the broken series, the ones that scream too long. Havel's breathing hitched. There are others in here? Morris's helmet tilted. There were. The chamber pulsed again, and the third seam flickered brighter, like it was enjoying our fear. I swallowed hard. What happened to Series 6? Morris's voice softened with something like pity. They ran, he said. They always run at first. They try to get back to the lander, but there is no lander. There is only the loop. So they take the discard door. And then? Havel whispered. Morris didn't answer. The answer came from the structure itself. The third seam brightened sharply, and the wall around it began to peel back, not opening like a door, but unfurling like tissue. A narrow passage formed, angled downward into darkness. But this darkness was different from the doorway where Rivas had gone. This wasn't presence dark. This was stale dark. Old, airless black filled with the sense of things left too long. Havel's voice broke. It's open. I stared into the passage, and my suit lights finally penetrated it. They revealed walls lined with shallow recesses, and inside those recesses were shapes. Not statues, not rocks. Suit helmets, human helmets. Some cracked, some intact, some with visors facing outward as if the people inside had died looking toward the exit. My mouth went dry. Jesus, I whispered. Havel made a choking sound. Those are ours. I stepped closer and shone my light into the nearest recess. A suit stared back at me, its helmet tilted slightly, visor spiderwebbed with fractures. Behind the visor, I could just make out a face. Male, pale, eyes open, and the face was mine. Not exactly, slightly, different proportions. A different scar near the jaw, but unmistakably me. I stumbled back, heart hammering so hard my HUD flashed warnings. Havel stared into the passage, and his voice turned hollow. Oh God, he whispered. That's what it means. Series. Morris spoke behind us, gentle as a lullaby. You see, he said. You can't run. You can only join. The cold behind my eyes surged, and for a moment I felt the temptation again, the relief of surrender, the promise of wholeness. I clenched my fist so hard my gloves creaked. No, I growled. Not me. I grabbed Havel's arm. We're going down, I said. Havel stared at me like I'd lost my mind. Into the discard channel, Tom? That's a grave. Yes, I said. And graves have walls, walls have edges, edges can be broken. The chamber pulsed once, heavy and slow, like a giant heart approving the choice. And behind us, in the dark doorway, the humanoid outline, pressed closer to the invisible barrier, its long fingers curling like it was ready to slip through the moment the seal failed. We stepped into the passage. The wall behind us began to fold shut, as if the structure was politely sealing the coffin. The passage smelled like nothing. That shouldn't be a sentence, but it's the only way to describe it. In a sealed suit, you expect filtered air, the faint chemical bite of scrubbers, the soft plastic stink of your own breath cycling back through regulators. Down there, it felt like my nostrils were full of blank space. Our suit lights carved narrow cones into the angled corridor, and the walls drank the beams without reflection. The material here wasn't the same smooth black as the main chamber. It was rougher, fractured in places, as if the structure had been forced to improvise this route with less care. A disposal channel, a place built to receive failure. The recesses continued down both sides like shallow graves. Helmets, gloves, a broken shoulder plate, a boot half embedded in the wall like the structure had started absorbing it and stopped halfway through. And the faces. I tried not to look at them. I failed. Every few meters there was another version of me, or close enough to make my stomach twist. Slight differences, a thinner face, a wider jaw, a different scar pattern, but always the same eyes, open behind a visor like someone had died refusing to blink. Havel moved beside me in short, rigid steps. He didn't speak. His breathing was loud in the comm, a ragged rhythm that fought against the chamber's pulse, still faintly vibrating through the floor. I could tell he wanted to scream and didn't know if screaming would help or just give the structure more leverage. I kept one hand on his arm like I could keep him anchored with pressure alone. We reached a bend where the corridor leveled out. The angle shifted from descent to flat, and the walls widened slightly. The floor here was cracked in a spiderweb pattern, and the cracks glowed faintly, like embers under ash. Havel finally spoke. "It's warm." He was right. Our thermal sensors had been steady, but now I felt heat through the soles of my boots, a low, sick warmth, rising from below. "Geothermal?" he asked, as if the universe still obeyed normal answers. "No," I said, because I knew what it felt like. It felt like proximity to something alive. The corridor opened into a smaller chamber, nothing like the vast basin above. This room was tight, claustrophobic, its ceiling low enough that our lights actually found it. The walls were lined with more recesses, but these were deeper, and they weren't empty. In the nearest one sat a suit that hadn't fully calcified into stillness. Its chest plate rose and fell, subtle, slow, like the person inside was barely breathing. Havel stumbled forward. "Oh my God!" I grabbed him, holding him back. "Wait." The suit's helmet turned slightly toward us. The visor was intact, but behind it, I saw movement, a face shifting in the shadows, a mouth forming words. Our comms crackled, and a faint voice bled through, distorted. "Late." Havel's voice shook. "He's alive." The suit's gloved hand lifted weakly, fingers twitching. Then the visor brightened from inside with a pale glow, and the face behind it became clear. It was me again, but older, much older, skin drawn tight over bone, eyes sunken, lips cracked. He looked like a man who'd been awake too long in a place that didn't allow sleep. He stared at us, and I felt a terrible recognition slam into me. Not memory, but identity. Like looking into a mirror that remembered versions of you that you'd tried to bury. His voice came through the comm again, clearer now, as if the structure was helping. "Series 7, he rasped. "You finally came." Havel backed up a step, horror freezing him. "Tom..." I didn't answer. I stepped closer, because I couldn't not. "Who are you?" I demanded, though the question tasted like denial. The older me smiled faintly, a painful expression. I'm what happens when you refuse, he said. I'm what you become when you take this door and try to outsmart a machine older than the solar system. I felt my hands shaking. How long have you been here? He looked upward, toward where the main chamber would be, as if time was stored in the ceiling. Long enough to forget the sky, he said. Long enough that my name stopped meaning anything. Havel found his voice. You're a previous iteration. The older me's eyes flicked to Havel, then back to me. Iteration, he repeated softly, like savoring the word. That's what they called it in the labs. They'd wipe you clean, patch up the gaps, send you back out again, and hope you didn't crack in the same place. My throat tightened. Labs. On Earth. He nodded slowly. Houston, Nevada, places with no windows. They showed us pictures of Saturn. They told us we were heroes. They told us the seal was failing and only we could help. Havel's voice went raw. Why make multiple yous? The older me's laugh was brittle. Because it kept rejecting us, he said. Because compatibility is rare. I swallowed hard. Compatibility with what? His gaze shifted past us, down the corridor behind our backs, and for a second his face twisted with fear so intense it made him look young again. With the thing behind the dark door, he whispered. The one that wants a mind to wear. The cracks in the floor glowed brighter, pulsing in time with that distant heartbeat. Havel's head turned, scanning the room as if expecting something to crawl out. What's down there? He asked. The older me's voice lowered. The discard chamber isn't just a graveyard, it's a buffer, a holding space for broken carriers until the structure decides what to do with them. My stomach sank. What does it do? The older me stared at me for a long time, then said quietly, It recycles. Before I could ask what that meant, the temperature rose another notch, and the floor cracks glowed hotter, light seeping through like molten lines. The older me stiffened. It knows you're here. Havel's breathing spiked. The structure? No, the older me whispered. Not the structure. His eyes locked onto mine. It, he said. The thing. The one they sealed. It can't cross the threshold yet, so it reaches through memories, through dreams, through whatever cracks it can find. I felt that cold pressure behind my eyes again, sharper now, like a nail being pressed into soft wood. The older me began to tremble, his chest plate rising and falling faster. He looked like a man having a seizure in slow motion. Tom, Havel whispered, terrified. What's happening to him? The older me's voice doubled for a second. One track his, one track deeper, smoother. I'm still useful, the second voice said through his mouth. Havel recoiled. No. The older me's eyes widened in panic. Don't, he tried to say. But his mouth moved without him. The smooth voice continued. You came through the discard channel. Predictable. You always choose walls. You always believe there is a mechanical solution. My blood turned to ice. That voice wasn't control. It was the same presence from the dark doorway, the one that had been whispering home and come closer. It had found a conduit. It was speaking through the broken me like a puppet. You can't have him, I snarled. The older me's mouth smiled. I already did, it said. The floor cracks flared bright, and the chamber shook, not from physical motion, but from a shift in pressure that made my inner ears scream. My HUD flashed warnings about vertigo and neural stress. Havel grabbed my arm. We need to go. Now. But I couldn't move because the older me, my corpse-to-be, was staring at me with eyes full of terror. His own voice broke through, weak and frantic. Tom, listen. It doesn't need the main door. If it has a carrier, it can... His words cut off as the smooth voice surged again. It can travel, it finished. Yes. I felt bile rise. Havel's voice turned desperate. How do we stop it? The older me's mouth opened, and for a moment, I thought it was going to answer. Instead, it spoke a single word that hit my mind like a hammer. Yield. The chamber pulse matched my heartbeat perfectly, and somewhere above us, in the main basin, the seal lines rotated into a final alignment. I felt it like a click deep inside my bones, a lock reaching the end of its cycle. Havel stared at me through his visor, eyes wide. "It's opening," he whispered. I looked back at the passage behind us. The corridor we'd entered through was changing. The walls were smoothing, seams dissolving. The structure was reconfiguring, like it was closing off options, trapping us, guiding us. And the older me, trembling in his recess, managed one last whisper with his own mouth before the puppet voice swallowed him again. "Don't let it wear you," he rasped. Then the glow in his visor went out, and something in the room began to move in the dark beneath the cracked floor. The movement beneath the cracked floor wasn't an animal crawl, it was a reconfiguration. The glowing fractures widened in slow, deliberate lines, like a circuit opening new pathways. Heat rose through my boots, not scorching, but intimate. Body heat, the warmth of something waking under a blanket. Havel backed toward me, one hand raised as if he could keep the floor from opening by sheer refusal. "Tom," he said, voice thin, "tell me you have a plan." I stared at the recess where the older me sat, or had sat. His visor was dark now, his chest plate no longer rose. The last trace of him, the human him, had been snuffed like a candle, leaving only the echo that had spoken through his mouth. And that echo was still here. I felt it around the room, like humidity, in the walls, in the floor, in the spaces between my thoughts. "Yield," it had said, not as a threat, as instruction. The chamber pulsed again, and the corridor behind us smoothed further, sealing. Microfractures, as if the structure was healing itself. The angled passage we'd entered through was narrowing, not physically closing like a door, but becoming less distinct, like reality was forgetting it existed. Havel cursed. "It's cutting us off." "Yes," I whispered. "It's forcing the outcome." The floor cracked wider, a section of it folded downward silently, peeling back like thick skin. Beneath it was not a pit of regolith or ice. It was a cavity lined with the same black material, and within that cavity ran pale veins of light that pulsed in time with the heartbeat that wasn't ours. Something rose from within, not a body, not a creature, a device, an apparatus shaped like a cradle, organic in its curves, as if built to hold something soft and thinking. It rose on a column of dark material that flowed upward like liquid deciding to be solid. The cradle stopped at waist height, and the moment it did, my HUD filled with text again. Carrier, readiness, 78%. Integration window, open. Proceed to stabilization. Havel's voice broke. Stabilization? What does that mean? The answer came from inside my skull, gentle as a hand on the back of my neck. "It means you stop resisting." I clenched my jaw so hard my teeth ached. "No," I said aloud. "No, we are not doing this." The structure didn't respond with argument. It responded with memory. I was back in the lab again. White walls, bright lights, my wrists strapped down. A man in a uniform stood over me, older than I remembered, his face carved by decades of secrets. "It's not evil," he said. "It's just incompatible with a free human mind. That's why we built you differently. That's why we trimmed the parts that wouldn't cooperate." I thrashed against restraints I couldn't feel in the present, my stomach turning. "What parts?" I demanded. The man's expression held a trace of pity. "Choice," he said. I snapped, back into the discard chamber with a gasp that fogged my visor. Havel was staring at me. "Tom, what did you just see?" I couldn't answer, because the truth was sitting in my throat like a shard of glass. They hadn't just trained us, they'd edited us. Not with surgery, not with implants, at least not visibly. They'd done it chemically, neurologically, with conditioning that burrowed down deeper than conscious recall. They'd made obedience feel like relief. They'd made surrender feel like coming home. And now the structure was pressing on those buried grooves like fingers on a bruise. Morris's voice came from above, faint, distorted through layers of architecture, as if he were speaking from behind thick walls. "You can't stop it," he said. "You can only decide who carries it." Havel spun, searching for the sound. "Morris!" No reply. Only the pulse. Only the cradle waiting. Havel's breathing went ragged. "We should destroy it." "With what?" I snapped. "A suit cutter? A sample drill? This material doesn't even register on our tools." Havel's shoulders sagged. "Then we're dead." "Not dead," the voice inside me corrected. "Used." The cradle's inner surface glowed faintly, and in that glow, I saw shapes. Imprints, like the hand depression on the first door. Only this time the imprint was bigger, shaped to receive a human torso, a place to lie down, a place to be fitted. Havel backed away until his shoulder hit the wall. "It wants you," he whispered. I didn't deny it because he was right. The pressure behind my eyes had become almost soothing now, like the moment before sleep. My fear was still there, but it was being wrapped in something warmer, something that didn't belong to me, a promise. "Let me in, and you won't be afraid anymore." I gripped my own forearm hard enough to hurt, trying to anchor myself in pain, in something real. "Jacob," I said, voice shaking but firm. "Listen to me. If it takes me, you go back. You tell someone. You..." Havel let out a harsh laugh. "Back where, Tom? There's no door. There's no lander. There's only this place rewriting itself around us." He was right. The corridor behind us had nearly vanished now, smoothed into a continuous wall. The seams were fading like chalk in rain. The structure was sealing the discard chamber the way you seal a coffin. Not to trap us, to preserve the outcome. And above us, faint through layers of black material, I felt the main chamber align into a final configuration. Like a mechanism reaching the end of a cycle. I suddenly knew, without being told, that the dark doorway up there was opening wider. That whatever held the entity back was weakening. That Rivas wasn't coming back as Rivas. That Morris was already gone. Havel pressed both hands to his helmet like he could hold his head together. "I can hear her again," he whispered. "She's crying." I looked at him and saw the same trap tightening around him. The bait tailored to his psychology. The mind's softest point. It didn't need to brute force its way into us. It only needed to offer us what we lacked. And then I realized what my plan had to be. Not to escape, to choose the shape of the failure. I stepped toward the cradle. Havel's eyes widened. "Tom, no." I raised a hand to stop him, palm outward. "Jacob," I said, keeping my voice calm. "I need you to do something for me, something human." He shook his head violently. No, don't." "When I say it," I continued, "I need you to hit my suit's emergency purge." He stared at me. "That'll kill you." "Yes," I said. The word fell heavy. The voice in my skull recoiled, a flicker of cold irritation. "No." "Yes," I repeated, "because you were right. It can't cross the threshold. Not fully. It needs a carrier to move." Havel's breathing hitched. "Tom, if it takes me and my suit purges, it loses the substrate," I said. "It loses the stability window. It loses the vessel." The cradle pulsed, as if offended. The pressure behind my eyes surged, trying to drown logic in warmth. "You will not do that." I forced a smile I didn't feel. "Watch me." Havel's eyes filled with tears that floated in his visor like tiny pearls. "I can't." "You can," I said gently. "Because that's the part they didn't cut out of you. You're still capable of refusing comfort." He shook his head, sobbing. "It's going to hurt." "I know." I said. I climbed into the cradle. The moment my back touched it, the glow surged around my suit like liquid light. I felt something press against my mind, soft, exploratory, like a tongue tasting a wound. Images slammed into me, worlds dead, stars dimmed, civilizations erased like chalk from a board. Not out of malice, out of function. The entity wasn't a demon. It was a tool built for a purpose that had outlived its makers. And now it was trying to remember its purpose through me. I fought to keep my voice steady. "Jacob," I said. "Now." Havel hesitated. I felt the entity pushing deeper, a cold finger sliding into the folds of my identity, searching for seams. My mouth opened, and for a horrifying moment, I wasn't sure whose words were about to come out. Then Havel screamed, not at me, at it, at the structure, at the thing in the dark that had stolen his wife's voice. His gloved hand slammed onto my suit's emergency purge switch. A siren shrieked inside my helmet. Red warnings flooded my HUD. Pressure loss imminent. Oxygen venting. Emergency purge activated. The warmth vanished instantly, replaced by brutal cold as my life support dumped its reserves into the chamber. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. But in that sudden vacuum of sensation, I felt the entity recoil like a hand yanked from fire. Its presence tore away from my mind with a soundless scream that still managed to echo inside my skull. "No!" My vision narrowed to a tunnel. Havel's face hovered above me, distorted by my failing optics, his mouth forming words I couldn't hear. I managed one last thought, a thin sliver of agency the lab hadn't taken. This is how you lock it again. My visor frosted. The world went grey. And in the last fraction of consciousness, I felt the structure around me, ancient, patient, respond. Not with anger, with acceptance. The cradle folded inward, sealing like a sarcophagus. The pulse slowed, the light dimmed, and somewhere above, I knew the dark doorway had stopped widening, because the seal had been fed what it needed. A carrier, a sacrifice, a seventh series that finally did what the others couldn't. When I woke again, much later, I wasn't on Iapetus. I was in a hospital bed on Earth, monitors beeping, fluorescent lights buzzing. A man in a suit leaned over me and smiled like a funeral director. "Welcome back, Thomas," he said. "You did very well." That's when I understood. They hadn't rescued me. They'd retrieved the container. And Saturn had only been the first lock. If this transmission ever reaches you, remember this. Some doors were never meant to be opened, and some truths were buried because humanity could not survive knowing them. Saturn is still there. The ruins are still waiting. And whatever we sealed away did not die. It learned patience. If you ever hear a voice telling you that you are incomplete, don't answer it.